What would you do if you were pulled over by police for no reason other than the color of your skin? If you were handcuffed, humiliated, and thrown in jail despite committing no crime? Bob Marley faced exactly this situation in 1978. And what happened when he stood before a judge would expose the ugly truth about police racism, while delivering a dose of justice so unexpected that it made national headlines. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell because we uncover the hidden gems that shape the legends we know today. September 15th, 1978, Interstate 40, somewhere between Memphis and Little Rock. Bob Marley was traveling in a rented car with his guitarist Al Anderson, heading to their next tour stop in Arkansas. It had been a long day of driving, but Bob was in good spirits. The Kaya tour was going well. His message of unity and love was reaching new audiences across America. And despite the challenges of being a black Jamaican musician in the American South, Bob felt optimistic about the power of music to change hearts and minds. Bob was driving carefully, staying exactly at the speed limit, hands visible on the wheel. He had learned from experience that any excuse could be used against him by the wrong police officer, so he was always extra cautious when traveling through certain parts of the country. At 3:47 p.m., Bob noticed flashing lights in his rearview mirror. His heart sank, but he remained calm. He pulled over to the shoulder of the highway and waited, hands clearly visible on the steering wheel. The state trooper who approached Bob's window was Officer Dale Morrison, a 15-year veteran of the Arkansas State Police. Morrison was a large man with a permanent scowl and a reputation among his colleagues for being tough on troublemakers, a euphemism for his well-known prejudices against anyone who didn't look like him. Morrison walked up to Bob's window with his hand resting on his weapon, already looking for a confrontation. "License and registration," Morrison barked without any greeting or explanation for the stop. Bob complied politely, handing over his documents. "Good afternoon, officer. May I ask why I was pulled over?" Morrison barely glanced at the license before his expression turned hostile. "Boy, you were weaving all over the road. I clocked you doing 75 in a 65 zone." Both statements were lies. Bob had been driving perfectly straight at exactly 65 mph, but he knew better than to argue with an angry cop on a lonely stretch of highway. "I'm sorry, officer, but I was being very careful with my speed. I had my cruise control set at 65. "Are you calling me a liar?" Morrison's voice rose dangerously. "No, sir. I'm just trying to understand." "Step out of the vehicle," Morrison ordered. "Now." Bob exchanged a worried glance with Al Anderson, then slowly exited the car, keeping his hands visible at all times. "You been drinking today?" Morrison asked, even though Bob clearly hadn't been. "No, sir. I don't drink alcohol." "What about drugs? You look like the type who uses drugs." The accusation was based on nothing more than Bob's appearance, his dreadlocks, his skin color, his Jamaican accent. But Morrison was fishing for any excuse to escalate the situation. "I don't use illegal drugs, officer." "Turn around. Put your hands on the car," Morrison commanded. Bob complied, and Morrison began an unnecessarily rough pat-down, clearly designed to humiliate rather than search for weapons. "What's this?" Morrison said, pulling out Bob's small pouch of legal medicinal herbs that he used for his Rastafarian religious practices. "Those are religious herbs, officer. They're legal." Morrison opened the pouch and smelled the contents. They were indeed legal herbs, nothing more than natural remedies and religious items that Bob used for meditation and spiritual practice. But Morrison had already decided how this encounter was going to end. "This looks like marijuana to me," Morrison said with a smirk. "You're under arrest for possession of illegal substances." "Officer, those are legal herbs. You can test them if you want." "I know drugs when I see them," Morrison replied, pulling out his handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." As Morrison read Bob his rights and cuffed him roughly, Al Anderson watched in horror from the passenger seat. He wanted to intervene, to protest, but he knew that would only make things worse for both of them. "What about my friend?" Bob asked as Morrison led him to the patrol car. "He can walk," Morrison said callously. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before bringing drugs into Arkansas." Bob was transported to the Pulaski County Jail, where he was booked, fingerprinted, and thrown into a holding cell. The herbs were sent to the state lab for testing, though Morrison already knew they would come back negative. He was hoping that Bob would just plead guilty to avoid the hassle of fighting the charges. What Morrison didn't know was that Bob Marley's arrest was about to become a very public embarrassment for the Arkansas State Police. Al Anderson had immediately called Bob's lawyers, who contacted the media. Within hours, news vans were outside the courthouse, and the story was spreading nationally. Reggae star Bob Marley arrested in Arkansas on drug charges. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the next morning. Morrison was confident that this would be a routine procedure. A guilty plea, a small fine, and the troublemaker would be on his way out of Arkansas. But when Bob walked into the Pulaski County Courthouse the next morning, he was about to encounter something that would shock everyone in the room. The judge assigned to the case was the Honorable Patricia Williams, a 52-year-old African-American woman who had been appointed to the bench just 2 years earlier. Judge Williams was known for her no-nonsense approach to justice and her intolerance for police misconduct. What nobody in the courtroom knew was that Judge Williams was also a Bob Marley fan. As a young civil rights lawyer in the 1960s, Patricia Williams had been inspired by music that spoke truth to power. She had been at the March on Washington, had worked on voting rights cases in the Deep South, and had always believed that music and justice were connected. When Bob Marley's music reached America in the mid-1970s, Judge Williams had been deeply moved by his messages of unity, equality, and resistance to oppression. When she saw Robert Marley on her docket that morning, she assumed it was a coincidence. But when Bob walked into her courtroom, Judge Williams felt her heart skip a beat. This was indeed the Bob Marley whose music had provided the soundtrack to her own fights for justice. Officer Morrison took the witness stand first, confident in his version of events. "Your Honor," Morrison testified, "I observed the defendant driving erratically and exceeding the speed limit. When I pulled him over, I detected the strong odor of marijuana emanating from the vehicle. A search revealed illegal substances in the defendant's possession." Judge Williams listened impassively, but she was already noting inconsistencies in Morrison's testimony. His report mentioned erratic driving, but the traffic camera footage from that stretch of highway, which she had quietly requested, showed Bob driving perfectly normally. "Officer Morrison," Judge Williams said, "you stated that you clocked the defendant at 75 mm Puch. Where is the radar evidence of this?" Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Well, Your Honor, it was a visual estimation. I've been doing this for 15 years. "I see. And this strong odor of marijuana you detected? Was that confirmed by the lab analysis?" Morrison's face reddened. "The lab results aren't back yet, Your Honor, but I know what marijuana smells like." "I'm sure you do. But we deal in facts here, not assumptions. Do you have the lab results?" Bob's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, we do have the lab results. They came back this morning." He handed a document to the bailiff. Judge Williams examined the lab report. As expected, the substances found in Bob's possession were completely legal herbs, with no trace of any controlled substances. "Officer Morrison," Judge Williams said, her voice taking on an edge, "the lab results show no illegal substances whatsoever. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Morrison was sweating now. "Well, Your Honor, sometimes the lab makes mistakes. Are you suggesting that the state crime lab is incompetent?" "No, ma'am, Officer Morrison, in your 15 years of experience, how many times have you pulled over vehicles driven by black men with dreadlocks?" Morrison's lawyer objected, but Judge Williams overruled. I'll allow it. This goes to the pattern of behavior. I don't keep track of that kind of thing, Morrison mumbled. I see. And in those stops, how many resulted in arrests for drug possession that were later dismissed due to lack of evidence? Morrison couldn't answer because he knew the truth would be damning. This was far from his first time arresting someone based on racial profiling rather than actual evidence. Judge Williams turned to Bob. Mr. Marley, would you please tell the court in your own words what happened yesterday afternoon? Bob stood up respectfully. Your Honor, I was driving carefully, obeying all traffic laws, when Officer Morrison pulled me over. He accused me of speeding and driving erratically, neither of which was true. He then searched me and found my religious herbs, which are completely legal. I was arrested despite committing no crime. Judge Williams nodded. Mr. Marley, I'm familiar with your music and your message of peace and unity. It seems particularly ironic that you would be targeted for harassment while traveling through Arkansas, spreading that very message. The courtroom was completely silent. Nobody had expected the judge to reveal her knowledge of Bob's work. Officer Morrison, Judge Williams said, turning back to the trooper, I've reviewed the evidence, and I find it completely lacking. There is no evidence of speeding, no evidence of erratic driving, and no evidence of any illegal substances. What I do see is evidence of racial profiling and police misconduct. Morrison's face went pale. Your Honor, I was just doing my job. No, Officer Morrison, you are not doing your job. Your job is to protect and serve all citizens equally. Instead, you used your badge and your authority to harass an innocent man based on his appearance and your own prejudices. Judge Williams stood up, her voice carrying the authority of decades of fighting for justice. Not only am I dismissing all charges against Mr. Marley, but I am ordering a formal investigation into Officer Morrison's conduct. I am also recommending that he undergo mandatory sensitivity training and face disciplinary action for false arrest and racial profiling. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. This was unprecedented, a judge publicly calling out police misconduct and defending the rights of a black defendant. But Judge Williams wasn't finished. Officer Morrison, I want you to stand up and face Mr. Marley. Morrison reluctantly stood, his face red with embarrassment and anger. I want you to apologize to Mr. Marley for violating his civil rights, for falsely arresting him, and for bringing shame upon the badge you wear. The demand for a public apology was almost unheard of in 1978 Arkansas, especially from a white police officer to a black defendant. Morrison stood there for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his pride and his precarious position. Finally, he turned to Bob. Mr. Marley, Morrison said through gritted teeth, I apologize for the arrest. That's not sufficient, Judge Williams said firmly. A real apology acknowledges the wrong that was done and shows understanding of its impact. Morrison tried again, his voice strained. Mr. Marley, I apologize for arresting you without cause, for treating you with disrespect, and for judging you based on your appearance rather than your actions. Bob nodded graciously. Apology accepted, Officer Morrison. I hope this experience helps you understand that we're all just human beings trying to make our way in the world. The grace and dignity Bob showed in that moment of victory left everyone in the courtroom amazed. Judge Williams concluded the hearing with words that would be quoted in newspapers across the country. Let this case serve as a reminder that justice is blind to race, religion, and appearance. We cannot allow prejudice to masquerade as law enforcement. Mr. Marley, you are free to go, and I hope you will continue spreading your message of unity and love. As Bob left the courthouse, reporters swarmed him for comments, but instead of expressing anger or bitterness, Bob used the moment to speak about forgiveness and understanding. Officer Morrison made a mistake, Bob told the press. We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them and try to do better. I hope this incident will help police officers think twice before judging someone based on how they look instead of how they act. The story made national headlines. Judge dismisses charges against Bob Marley, calls out police racism. It became a symbol of both the persistent problem of racial profiling and the possibility of justice when the system works as it should. Officer Morrison did indeed face disciplinary action. He was suspended without pay for 2 weeks and required to complete 40 hours of sensitivity training. More importantly, the incident sparked policy changes within the Arkansas State Police regarding traffic stops and probable cause. Judge Williams became something of a folk hero, praised for her courage in standing up to police misconduct at a time when it was rarely challenged. She continued to serve on the bench for another 20 years, always fighting for equal justice under law. Bob and Judge Williams developed a friendship that lasted until Bob's death in 1981. She attended his memorial service and spoke about the power of music to inspire justice. Bob Marley's music taught me that we must stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult, she said in her eulogy. That day in my courtroom, I had the opportunity to practice what his music preached, that all people deserve dignity, respect, and equal treatment under the law. The case also had a lasting impact on Bob himself. He often spoke about it in interviews, using it as an example of how individuals within flawed systems could still choose to do the right thing. That judge showed me that justice is possible when good people refuse to go along with wrong, Bob said. She could have just processed me through the Courtroom system like any other case, but she chose to stand up for what was right. That's what we all have to do. Use whatever power we have to fight injustice wherever we find it.